Oh my, what a weird month it's been for the tabletop world. Templin tipped the T over, D&D channels became T&D channels. It's been wild. Now, first off, it goes without saying that my brother and I support Open D&D and the OGL 1.0. We'll have a link to a site that has consolidated information if you're unfamiliar of the situation. With all that being said, let's go and talk about some tabletop role-playing games. D&D is an amazing game, but there are others out there, gritty games, mystical games, and things you don't know that you needed. So let's go over a few that I quite enjoy. Fragged Empire. So we've been pretty model focused here on MPT, mainly because it's just really easy to cover that a lot and really quickly, considering I do it more frequently than I do tabletop role playing. D&D would have been the start for this channel, and we really wanted to become the LTT of tabletop gaming. And, you know, D&D was going to be where we'd make our first adventure module and possibly even, you know, provide some things for you guys via a Patreon or something. However, now with the D&D changes, we need to kind of retool what we're doing. It's why we ended up looking outwards to these other systems, looking for systems that we could possibly use to make things in the future as creatives ourselves. So, keeping in line with the whole mixture of minis and roleplay, how about we talk about Fragged Empire? Fragged is a 3d6 game, and it has a big focus on tactical mini combat and non-linear progression. Tactical mini combat is something I like a lot, and in games like Cyberpunk Red, trying to infuse that kind of energy into the combat you play over there is really great. You get big XCOM energy vibes, and Frag definitely has that built into the core game mechanics. Speaking of XCOM and Cyberpunk Red, Fragged is post-apocalyptic with a tinge of cyberpunk and sci-fi mixed in there. It's a role-playing game that can very easily become Stalker if you wanted it to. Survival and long play sessions with brutal fights are the cornerstone of really the whole thing here. Once combat starts in Fragged, players roll their intelligence to see who goes first in combat, which is kind of weird and hard to get used to for somebody who's a veteran of D&D. I mean, it's a 3d6 game. If you've only played D&D, 3d6 is gonna sound a bit strange instead of using a d20. It also has reflex though, but reflex and intelligence are kind of different in how they're worded in the rules system here. Intelligence is much more tactical know-how rather than nerd status, and reflex is more like how you respond under fire, more like the physical aspect of responding to something rather than the mental aspect of planning for something. It's really funny, in the quick start guide under the combat section, there's like this whole blurb about combat never being balanced. I really like this idea and concept for a GM. You have to fight dirty if you're a player, and this is just great. You know, this kind of shows that the world is outwardly trying to kill you, which for D&D, you're more like a superhero. It's also why I really like Cyberpunk Red and think that's an apt comparison to this one. It has that kind of ethos running through it too, where your character will die because the streets always win. Compared to the other things I'm going to show, you're going to need a grid map or like a ruler, you know, the tactical turn-based Warhammer type stuff that you'd use. Maybe bring it out for this game. You know, just get a Chessex dry erase mat or whatever. I'll link one down below that I really like. The tactical combat is where the game really shines, considering it's been a majority of where I've been focusing the attention here. It really is just something super different than the rest of the games out there. And if you wanted to, you could take this system and apply it to something that you use and homebrew it at home. That's kind of the point with these kind of games. Anyway, if Fragged is a little too complicated for you, maybe try out Cyberpunk Red first, but if you're a Cyberpunk genre fan, Mass Effect fan, or Stalker fan, you're probably going to find a lot to love in this tabletop RPG. It's unique, it's interesting, and it definitely stands out against the myriad of fantasy-themed role-playing games that you can pick up on Drive-Thru-RPG. Warlock Traitors Edition. I'll probably do another list in the future, but I need to read a lot of rules, and managing all these game systems in my head is actually really taxing, especially when you're trying to apply it to creating like an adventure module. I was pretty mixed on whether I should include this or Five Torches Deep, but Warlock eventually, you know, won out. Both of those have heavy OSR inspo, but you know, I wasn't alive in the 70s. I'm sure both of these games would bring a lot of joy to someone that has that whole old school ethos running through their tabletop experience and play, but I'm not that person. Anyway, what is Warlock? Well, it's gonna sound kind of annoying, but I kind of picked Warlock for its presentation alone. There has been this running theme of high fantasy getting constantly clean and really nice. And I think that's great, and it's good for people, and the Lord of the Rings, I'm sure, is a good time. But Warlock is different. Warlock is deliciously gritty in its presentation. It sets the world up in a different way. It rides this fine line between that meaty Warhammer fantasy art and like mall import store statue. You know, like this tree or this statue of a gnome, fairy, or old geezer. Warlock is, according to what it says, a streamlined emulation of old school British tabletop. Again, I wasn't alive in the old school when it was just a school, so I'll just take their word for it. A lot of people use Warlock to run a Warhammer fantasy campaign or just have more gritty fantasy roleplay experience. Unlike Fragged, this isn't a 3d6 system, it's a d20 system. I haven't gotten to play this one as someone who is primarily a D&D player or the forever GM, but the d20 definitely makes it easier to get new players into it, especially if you want to present something that is a bit of a different flavor from D&D. Mainly what makes it really interesting as a system here is the character creation. Character creation is really interesting because you roll d6s in a career pool. Basically, you roll a d6 4 times, and this will correspond to a table. And it'll basically pick out 4 careers to choose from. So you might have the choice between a beggar, a gambler, a noble, and a road warden. These careers do determine a lot of how the characters start out, with special career skills that you can use in the game. You also end up with career-specific gear. Careers play into more than that, though. They also play into the adventuring skills, and the adventuring skills are similar to D&D skills like acrobatics and history and all that. However, it does mean a little more here in certain aspects. Depending on the career you take, the values to which you can increase these skills vary. So you'll have hard caps and deficiencies in certain skills. This adds some cool flavor to your character because, a beggar will be a really streetwise individual, but a beggar wouldn't understand what water really is. Being a man of the street, he'd want to meet solid ground wherever he is. So the second he's in water, he's gonna sink to meet that ground.
Hello, how are you? I am under the water. Please help me. Here too much raining.
I'm planning on doing a one-shot with Warlock because I think it might actually really excel in that kind of format, but maybe I'm struggling to explain what makes the careers so cool and interesting as a concept, but the idea of characters having negative traits is just as fun as them having positive traits. I think a fun way to handle Warlock would maybe be like a Darkest Dungeon type exploration RPG, or maybe if you're a Warhammer Fantasy fan, this will definitely feel like a good time for you. I, again, am not familiar with too much OSR stuff, but I am looking to learn more, and I am excited to see what Warlock brings to the table with its interesting presentation. But I thought it was interesting enough that it needed to be featured in this video. ICRPG. Okay, frankly, I didn't want to say I had a favorite, but I do. I love this one. I like everything featured here, but I mean, Hankering, my man, I want to be like this man when I'm older. He's an absolute goofy king, okay? Hankering, aka Runehammer, is a veteran of the D&D and tabletop landscape. This guy has been around, okay? That sounds kind of rude when I say it, but I do mean it as a compliment. He's been making content for like the past decade. Anyway, I want to make sure that you understand that ICRPG, Index Card RPG, is something really special. The rulebook is small, the core mechanics are simple but allow for complexity, and the rules are setting agnostic. The writing in the rulebook is playful, and the art alongside it is super great and stylized. If I had friends who never played a tabletop RPG and I wasn't going to choose D&D, then I would choose this. If I had new players who wanted to play a TTRPG but hated fantasy, I would also choose this. If I am doing education with youth or doing team building things or working with actors, I would use this system to do that. It's a great system and a tool that I can use professionally as an educator, filmmaker, or even just as a DM. Index Card RPG is simple enough that I can carry around the stuff I need in a bag really easily, and then even if I wanted to, do an impromptu session of a one-shot just wherever. So really, what is it about ICRPG that makes it special? Well, first off, it's a D20 system, so picture you and your players enter a room, and the whole room will get a DV, the difficulty value in case you don't play Dungeons & Dragons. Generally, this is going to be 12. Depending on what the players are doing, that DV will either go up or down, plus or minus 3, right? So doing something difficult will have it go up, doing something easy will have it go down. In my notes, and yeah, I actually wrote down notes for this one. See, I got a cute little Game Master's journal. Anyway, the example I use in here is that the room is flooding with lava, right? So let's say after you're fighting a slime, the DV for the room is still 12 even after the slime is dead, and now lava is coming in. There's an overhang that you can safely climb up to using a rope in the room, and the players will roll a d20 plus their dex and jump up to the overhang. But because that's difficult, it's a hard thing to do, the DV is now 15. Well, the player gets a 10, and he falls on his cheeks. Now, if he used a rope, it'd have been a 9, and that 10 would have saved him his precious seconds so he didn't get burnt by the pursuing lava. There's also an attempt system as well with this, so that would have been a check that I just explained. An attempt is a little different. Basically, after a successful attempt of a roll, you'd roll a d20. After that, you roll effort using a corresponding die, which is how you calculate damage. Effort is also flexible too, which means it can be applied to more than just combat, as your gear or your hands are just as much tools as they are weapons. Picking a lock doesn't have to take time, now it takes effort. There is health behind these rolls. If a player rolls poorly on effort, maybe enough time or rounds will have passed that a guard comes to check out what the prisoner is doing. You can do this in rounds using the timer systems that are explained in ICRPG as well. ICRPG is flexible and will be going in a minimalist travel DM kit that I'm putting together, which is like a month away in terms of video because I'm getting some handcrafted items. But make sure to subscribe to Mana Potion Tabletop so that way you can get some inspo on what you should travel around with. Anyway, in that video, we'll look at more ICRPG stuff because there's lots of really interesting tools that you can apply as a DM or GM for whatever game you're running, and again, it doesn't have to be high fantasy. Baron de Rop actually has a really good explanation of this game, so I'll link it down below in case you want to learn more about ICRPG. Really, ICRPG is great because of the accessibility. You can see how all of that is at the core of Hank's design philosophy. It facilitates the most important aspect of TTRPGs, the whole play part. I think that the system has a lot of room to grow, especially as an ecosystem driven by the community. So hopefully this stuff with the OGL does, build up some more content for ICRPG players and makes the system more popular. In this post-OGL world, if that's the world that we're going to be living in, I'd want to put out content for ICRPG. In fact, right now we're seriously considering it for MPT, but the project is really early days and I have some big stuff that I need to take care of first with this channel before I go and do that. All the games I mentioned are on sale, by the way. ICRPG isn't, but you can get a PDF and a soft cover for $6.50 or $16.50. So, it's still a bargain, by the way. There also might be a bundle for some of these, so I'll link down the bundle if it's still up. So I'll link that as well. I think the money does go to charity. So in the meantime, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell, and I'll see you next time.